Welcome to the Outsmart Overeating podcast. I'm your host, Leslie Hooper, and I have Coach Steph Miramontes alongside me today. Steph, thanks for joining me for our third episode of the Outsmart Overeating podcast since rebranding from Fat Murder. How are you feeling about the new name? Is it starting to feel like a shoe that has been broken in yet?
You know, this name has been something that we have used in a few things already, and it already is a shoe that fits, in my opinion. It just needed to be brought to this platform and this format because it makes so much sense. So I am definitely rolling with the name. I'm good with it. It feels good.
One thing I wanted to mention right out the gate is we open the doors to our signature psychology-based weight loss program, Unstuffed, twice a year. And I want to put it on your calendar so you can know about it ahead of time, because we are going to be opening the doors on Monday, April 22nd. This is a 26-week program. And I just want to be clear that there is no obligation when you join the interest list. That will be linked in the show notes. But anyone who does join the interest list will have access to exclusive bonuses that the general population does not. So even if you are kind of, sort of, maybe interested, then I would encourage you to join that list so you can get those early notifications and access to the bonuses when we do open the doors to the program. Of course, we'll be talking more about that in the upcoming weeks, but I just wanted to make sure that you all are aware of it so you can plan ahead. And I'm looking forward to it because we do it, what, Steph? I guess April typically, and then October. So twice a year. And this program is what has been coined as life-changing by many of our clients. So I'm excited to meet some new faces, change some more lives.
I'm excited about the spring cohort because it's such a good time to start something like this. It's a great time because school is, for some, we've got spring break and things like that going on. Maybe you have a little bit more time to focus. It's after all the holiday mess. You know, so many people start this kind of stuff right in January 1st and on the holidays, and that's cool. Like, I was a New Year's resolution or two in a lot of ways over and over again before it was finally like, oh, okay, I get this. But the springtime is just, it just feels different. All of the chaos is behind you and it introduces you into the summer months. It's just a really good time. I like the spring cohort. It feels good.
All right. Well, like I said, join the interest list in the show notes if you want to learn more about the details. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what we do with the habit pillar in our program. Last week, we spent some time breaking down the 3 pillars of the Unstuffed program. But today I want to kind of zoom in and focus primarily on the 7 habits for permanent weight loss. So these are the behaviors that we actually teach in the Unstuffed program. And maybe right out the gate, it makes the most sense to touch on what is a habit. And I think most people listening to this podcast probably know, but I just want to make sure that we're on the same page here. Habits are small decisions that you make and actions that you perform every day. And the reality is most of your weight loss struggles that you're currently maybe finding yourself hitting a brick wall over and over again is probably due to some habits, subconscious habits that you've created. So in order to replace them, we need to find new ones, right? And the one thing that James Clear talks about in the book Atomic Habits is the idea you can't really break a habit. You have to replace it because there's a benefit to habits. Otherwise, we wouldn't do them over and over again, right? So I think when we're dieting, we're trying to lose weight, we traditionally think about habits. We think about things like brushing our teeth or driving a same route to work every morning. But habits actually go so much deeper than that. And they start in our subconscious mind long before we see them show up in our actions. So this means that our thoughts are habits too. And I don't think, Steph, most people really think of our thoughts being habits. In the weight loss diet industry, they really focus on the action piece, which we spent quite a bit of time talking about last week's episode. But there's no real conversation about how our thoughts create the feelings and the feelings create the actions, right? And if, 50% approximately of our habits, our behaviors are in automation, that's what Duke University says, is that, our habits account for about 50% of our behavior on any given day, then like, doesn't it benefit us to kind of start at the thought place first and foremost?
I definitely never considered that thoughts were habits when I first started this journey by any means, until you start to realize that you think the same things over and over again. You're having the same conversations with yourself over again. You're having the same obstacles. It's like, we are just doing this thing again, the same sabotage, the same successes. Everything sounds so similar. And when you realize that, you have to put it down to either something is wrong with me, I'm a broken person, I need to be fixed, or I have a thought error here. And I don't know about you, but I would much rather feel like I had a thought error, something I could fix, something I could work on and practice and change the habit, than believe that I was inherently broken as a person, which was my old way of thinking. I like my new way of thinking. It's much more successful. It's much more beneficial.
Absolutely. In a nutshell, I think the reality is we are the sum of our habits, right? So, as I've said in the past, how in shape or out of shape someone is a result of their habits. How happy or unhappy you are, a result of your habits. How successful or unsuccessful you are, also a result of your habits. So, we can't dismiss the power of habits. And that is why it is one of the 3 pillars in the program. As I mentioned earlier, some of the bigger mistakes I think that dieters make, again, is just focusing on the external factors, counting our calories, eating more whole foods, drinking more water, getting in those 10,000 steps a day, right? But I think it might be helpful, Steph, to take a moment and kind of think about first, what I guess ultimately why diets don't work. In terms of, look, I'm just a believer, we can't solve a problem that we don't understand. So first, if we think about like the mistakes that we make or the reasons why diets don't work, for me, it comes to a belief about they're unnatural, right? Like they're uncomfortable. I don't know about you, but I had a lot of mental fog and, sex drive in the shitter, feeling lethargic. Plus, it disrupts the spontaneity and fun. It kind of does have the ability to suck the fun out of life. And the other thing I always talk about is how it kind of encourages us to make too many drastic changes at once. And basically, diets want us to become an entirely different person overnight. And the reality is, as I just said, we are creatures of habit and routine. We thrive off of those patterns. We find them comforting and safe. So too many changes at once disrupts that flow, right? It's too difficult to maintain long term. And this is why we see the average New Year's resolutioner dropping out of their diet, their quest for weight loss by week 3. So what do you think are some of the bigger mistakes you've seen or witnessed in dieters and why they can't maintain the momentum to be consistent enough to get the goal?
I think that there are a couple of different ways to look at this. One of them being the actual biological consequences, like you said, reduced energy, brain fog, lots and lots of food decisions being made and therefore taking up a lot of your mental and emotional space. It's very distracting. You might be a little bit more irritable. You have to learn how to manipulate hunger so that you don't ever experience it. There's fear. So we have those pieces of the puzzle. And then we have this other side that's just a little bit more practical that says to me, when you go on some kind of diet, you're taking on all of these rules, and generally they aren't very close to what your current lifestyle, your preferences and things like that are. And so you're being asked to basically change your whole life overnight based on a book you read. And sometimes that can be really empowering and good. You talked about some of these doing type things, exercise and nutrition and, all that kind of stuff can be helpful and good to know. But if right now your current lifestyle goes completely against all of that, then it's not going to be very sustainable. Yeah, you might be able to, run a sprint if a bear is chasing you or a dog is chasing you down the street, but you're not going to keep sprinting forever. You have to kind of get in shape. You have to change slowly and gradually, and it has to mimic your values, the things that are important to you. That usually just doesn't happen overnight unless some real serious shit goes on in your life. And I just wouldn't wait around for some kind of miraculous, terrible thing to happen to you, to shock the shit out of you and change your habits on day one.
Yeah. I also think that dieting just requires us to use so much willpower. Again, right? Kind of going against that unnatural or that natural hunger and fullness cue. I mean, now we're eating from our heads according to a clock, according to a meal plan, a calorie count, and we lose that connection to our physical cues. And as you indicated, fear. And I do want to talk a little bit about fear as we move on, because I do think that's a big contributing factor as to why we have goals and there are things that we want to do, but yet struggle to actually do them. And as a matter of fact, the next week's podcast episode is really going to be dedicated to that topic. So make sure you catch that one as well, because I do think a lot of it is rooted in fear when it comes to self-sabotage. But listen, if you're like the old me, then chances are, if you're listening to this podcast, you're struggling with consistency, whether it's consistency in your eating, consistency in your exercise, consistency in your calorie counting, whatever your path is, right? And it's going to look different for everyone. But chances are, if you're on the struggle bus, trying to lose weight, feeling defeated, there's probably a part of that that is because you can't execute your plan consistently. And that's a big problem when it comes to weight loss, because if we can't do something consistently, it's never going to become a habit. And this is ultimately why most dieters do end up circling the diet drain, as we say, bouncing up and down the scale and not really making any meaningful progress. And so I know our listeners just want me to get to the point already. They're like, okay, so how do I become more consistent, right? How can I be so consistent that I'm able to achieve my goal? And Steph, I just want to take some time here to break down the 7 primary habits that we use in the Unstuffed program to help our clients put this into practice for weight loss. Right? So right out the gate, Steph, when you think about day 1, week 1 in the Unstuffed program, what is one of the primary foundational habits that we ask our clients to do right out the gate?
I think that day one day one to me is the hardest, even though it doesn't feel the hardest right out the gate because you're excited, you're enthusiastic, all the things. I think it presents the most difficult series of habits. And when I think about it, it's sit your ass in a chair and eat your food undistracted. That means put your cell phone away. That means turn off the television. It means don't bring all of this technology into your mealtime experience. And there's a lot of resistance and FOMO and things like that that come up, especially in a culture where we're working and we're used to working on our computers, where we're used to eating and answering emails, eating and scrolling on our phone, eating and watching television, eating and watching the game, like whatever it is. And so it's really about reconnecting back to the eating experience, which is so difficult when your habit is Instagram and your sandwich.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed what 2 or 3 habits there. When I think about day one, we do actually encourage our clients to implement a handful of habits simultaneously. So if we look at them individually, right away, as Steph indicated, sitting down, ass in chair. And this is really to help you develop a new environment, a new environmental habit, I guess you could say, of eating in a designated eating spot. So maybe to mirror a dining experience similar to that of what we experience when we're in a restaurant. And what I love about sitting at a table in a chair is that there is a clear beginning and end to a meal that we don't generally have when we're in front of the TV, right? We know distracted eaters typically eat approximately 50% more calories in a meal. So if we're eating distracted, there's a good chance, 50% approximately, that you're going to end up overeating. So the idea is to eat undistracted so you can bring some awareness to your physical cues, observe your hunger and fullness. To be clear, Steph, as we often have to remind our clients, this doesn't mean you're eating without your family, right? It does mean, as you said, eating without the TV, the phone, podcast, computer, anything that's going to take your attention kind of away from your own thoughts, feelings, and dining experience. The other thing that I think might be worth mentioning here is the recommendation of a 9-inch plate specifically. And Steph, if you don't mind to explain that alongside the 3 to 4 meals with no snacking in between.
So the 9-inch plate to me is just obvious. We need some kind of boundary, and our stomachs are about the size of a fist. Yes, they stretch and expand, and no, we don't have to like think about a chewed up ball of fist-sized food or anything disgusting like that. But you're not going to be able to eat a ton of food without consequences. Chances are you're going to start getting those fullness signals and things when you've eaten about the amount of food that fits on a 9-inch plate. Also, when you start reducing the amount of food that you eat, and if you're an overeater, you're going to probably need to do that, then you can start to get kind of the scarcity mindset, because there's a lot of room on your plate and a lot of space on your plate. It makes your food look so small and not enough and all the things. I would rather make my 9-inch plate abundant, especially in the beginning. Now I don't care, but in the beginning, I would have preferred to have more of an abundant look on my plate than to have this giant, I don't know, turkey platter that we have here in the US at least as my dinner plate, and just have like a 9-inch plate worth of the amount of food on it. So there's a psychological benefit to it. There's a boundary benefit to it. It just gets you thinking differently. And frankly, cultures everywhere else tend to use 9-inch plates or 8-inch plates instead of, again, turkey platters to serve their food. It's also interesting to see people be willing to do this at breakfast and lunch and less willing to do it at dinner. They have a quote unquote dinner plate versus a breakfast and lunch plate. And I'm like, your stomach's the same size all day, right? Like breakfast, lunch, and dinner, our stomach is not changing size so much. So I think it gives us a healthy boundary. And then 3 to 4 meals, gosh, that's the best habit for me, because when I went from 6 meals to 3 to 4 meals, there are fewer overeating opportunities, for one. There is less food noise, less food decisions to make. I'm not constantly thinking about food. I'm not eating so little that it's just enough food to piss me off and make me count down the minutes to my next meal. It's like, oh, cool, I had breakfast at 8, but like I get to eat again at 10:30. Is it 10:30 yet? Is it 10:30 yet? Oh my gosh, so annoying. Because it just wasn't a satiating and satisfying amount of food. And It also kind of gives you that space between meals. We're not snacking. We're not mindlessly eating. Humans are terrible at knowing how much they eat when they're mindlessly eating and mindlessly snacking. We think that we're doing quote unquote so good. And when in reality, we just don't remember how much we've eaten. So snacks add up. And when people are snacking, they're generally doing it mindlessly and habitually. So we're not being thoughtful about the experience that we're having, about why we're eating, how much we're eating, what emotions or circumstances or environmental triggers are driving that behavior. So lots of benefits to 3 to 4 meals.
The other thing I love about that habit in particular is how it invites hunger. And so many of our clients believe right out the gate that I don't have a hunger signal or fullness. And I understand why they may feel that way. I mean, the reality is when you've been dieting, you're generally on the opposing, on one extreme, wow, I can't even speak today, on the spectrum from one extreme to the other, right? You're either starving or stuffed. There's not much in between. And so when you're a snacker, very rarely are you actually creating an opportunity for hunger to arrive. And when we are experiencing hunger consistently throughout the day before each meal, it's a good signal that we are not overeating. And this is how the body becomes the ultimate calorie counter, because it will adjust based off of your individual needs, based off of your movement, your sleep, your menstrual cycle. All of these factors play a role. But in the beginning, it's very confusing for the majority of our clients to manage hunger, which, I guess the other piece of this is when it comes to 3 meals a day, no snacking, it's not because snacks are inherently bad. If you get hungry in between your meal, of course, eat and move on with your life. But the reality is the vast majority of us really only do need about 3 meals per day. And if we are honoring that fist-sized stomach, then it really does equate to be the pretty close to the right amount for your needs right out the gate. The plate, 9-inch plate, is a bit of training wheels. By the end of the program, a client really shouldn't need or be dependent on that 9-inch plate. And so the other thing that I wanted to just mention briefly about the 3 meals a day is it really highlights your desire to emotionally eat in between your meals. So if you want to eat, you have an urge, a craving, but you're not physically hungry, now we have something to start exploring. Now we have some thoughts and feelings that are driving an action. And so that's our opportunity to get curious about, okay, well, I'm not physically hungry, but mentally, my brain keeps telling me to eat. Now we have an opportunity to get to the bottom of the emotional eating. And for the vast majority of us, this is going to be a habit. Some of you get hungry at 3 o'clock every single day. Well, chances are that's rooted in a habit. So we can start to reverse engineer, look at that a little bit more closely, unravel that particular habit, get to the bottom of it, and replace it, right? And this is where we do our best work. So the other thing, and I mean, let's be honest, emotional eating is what contributes to overeating. For if we are emotional eaters and we are eating consistently, creating an environment for overeating, that is likely the habit that is contributing to the weight gain. And so we do want to assess that more closely. So once those foundational habits are kind of all grooving together, as I say, kind of working in harmony, Steph, to use my analogy, each one is kind of like an instrument, and when they all come together, right, then we have a good foundation to then start exploring hunger. And I think when people are new to our message, they kind of expect us to be doing the hunger fullness thing on day one. And we don't. We spend as much time as the client needs, but on average, 3 to 4 weeks, kind of mapping out, getting down, addressing any instances of emotional eating, creating that framework to introduce hunger into the program. So I'd love for you to share a little bit about hunger. I mean, when I think about it, Steph, and someone who's new to this message or this concept, as you indicated earlier, one of the biggest obstacles that someone who's new to this is they fear hunger or are just disconnected from it entirely. So I know the diet industry kind of gives hunger a bad rap, and I just love for you to share some of your perspective on hunger specifically.
Yeah, the diet industry either glamorizes it like it's, I don't know, intermittent fasting, and it's the most amazing thing if you could just stretch it out forever. And then all of your cells are going to be renewed and like whatever, blah, blah, blah. It's anti-aging bullshit, by the way, especially for women. But I digress. That's not what this podcast is about. But so they either glamorize it or they villainize it. And they try to tell you, oh, well, here are all the ways that you can do to avoid it, to manage it. In fact, I was listening to something on weight loss drugs the other day, and somebody was talking about how their partner went in for a higher dose because some of their hunger was starting to come back. And I'm like, we don't need to obliterate hunger. And this isn't about weight loss drugs or not. It's a representation of the way that dieting messes with your head and villainizes hunger like it's a terrible thing, when in actual truth, it is a biological norm. It is a communication system. As much as all of us would probably love to just like take away the whole I need to pee signal because it's so annoying, only if you actually never actually had to pee, right? Hunger is the way that our body communicates a need. It says, hey, I would like more fuel, please. I'd like some more energy. I need you to sit down and rest and recover and restore my needs so that I can take you on for the rest of the day and take care of you. And so if we're trying to shut that signal down, if we're saying, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, we're not listening to you, we don't want to hear you, then it can be really confronting when it starts showing up. But when we have a changed relationship with hunger, we realize hunger is not an emergency. It is something to respond to instead of react to. It's something to be grateful for because it means you're healthy and normal and your body is working. Then we can work with our hunger. It's one of my favorite habits, period, because it really shows us, hey, how long is my food holding me over for? How long am I staying energized for before this starts showing up? If you're someone who has a very specific lunch hour, you're someone who has very specific needs when it comes to meal times, you are able to invite hunger and work with it so that you can get your fat loss results without excessive hunger, without extreme hunger, gentle hunger, like just normal biological amounts of hunger. It's helpful.
Yeah, for sure. When I was dieting, I mean, hunger had nothing to do with when I ate. I ate because I was sad, bored, lonely, because my diet started on Monday, because, like I said, I mean, the reality is most of us don't really understand the difference between mind hunger versus body hunger. And so when you've been dieting for years, like I said earlier, we're mostly eating from our minds. We're eating according to that clock, that calorie counting app, and the meal plan, but we are not eating according to our stomach. And what's interesting is that we weren't born this way, right? As small children, babies, toddlers, we were natural eaters. And I think similar to religion and politics, it's not until we become influenced by our parents, peers, media, and culture at large that we really begin internalizing these food rules and beliefs and lose that connection to our bodies. And so the other thing I think that might be worth mentioning here is that we also just live in a culture where eating outside of hunger is a habit. And everybody does it. Since childhood, we've kind of been taught to use food to manage our emotions. Fall down, scrape a knee, mom kisses it better and gives you a cookie, right? Use the toilet properly while you're potty training. Well, here's an ice cream cone. Read 30 books this month in your third grade class. Well, you get to attend the pizza party on Friday. So because the habit of eating provides that emotional reward, that benefit, it's difficult to stop the habit of emotional eating. And I think this is kind of where the psychology pillar in the Unstuffed program starts to shine, right? Because this is how we introduce our clients to unlearning the habit of emotional eating and how to reconnect to their physical cues. And so, Steph, the final habit that we use in the program is fullness, learning how to master your fullness and feeling your 5 on the fullness scale. And so when I think about the scale, right, and just for context purposes, we do teach our clients and on Stuff how to monitor hunger and fullness using a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is so hungry, you'll eat everything in the kitchen. That's not nailed down. And then 10 is kind of that Thanksgiving Day levels of stuffed, right? And then 5 is neutral. And that's really what we're aiming for, because when you're eating above a 5 on the scale, really above, I would say like a 6 or a 5 or a 6, then you're now eating from mind hunger, not body hunger. So, Steph, what would you like to contribute or add here to fullness?
Yeah, I look at 5 as deficit fat loss meals. 6 is closer to maintenance meals. And that doesn't mean that 7s don't happen sometimes. That's normal. It always kind of cracks me up when somebody says they finish their meal at a 3 or something. And I'm like, were you dying before you started? Like, what happened there? But when it comes to fullness, there's so much learning to do and unlearning to do, especially as it relates to dieters like me that was really playing the volume game. And so for me, I was trying to get as much food as possible in because, again, afraid of hunger, counting down the minutes till I get to eat again, unsatisfying food. And it does kind of screw with your head a little bit. It's like, hey, you have this many calories, points, whatever, use them wisely. And so you just start negotiating and thinking like, I could have a little bit of this and that would make room for a little bit of that. And then I could have a little bit of that. And like, but then I don't want this because that's only 3 bites. And like, it's just so pervasive and annoying and it hijacks your brain. So when you do come into the hunger piece or the fullness piece, excuse me, there are probably some unlearning to things that you need to do if you were a volume eater, particularly. If you were someone who played those games with yourself, then chances are it's going to be a little bit confronting, but it's also really nice. One of the things that I love the most, and I kind of said this earlier, was going to that 3 to 4 meals allowed me to have really satisfying, satiating meals that I felt were bigger meals because they stuck to my ribs a little bit. I wasn't trying to fill up on lettuce and water and, turning my oatmeal into zucchini oats so that I could have this huge portion because everybody, dreams of zucchini oats for breakfast. But really just eating like a normal person, having room to eat like a normal person helped me realize that I didn't need as much as I thought I did from a volume perspective. I just thought I did because there was nothing good going in. It just wasn't great. So I think when it comes to the fullness piece, there's a reason we do it last. All the other pieces put together really make fullness much, much easier because if you're waiting for hunger, chances are you're already kind of starting to think about fullness. You're already kind of practicing it. If you're seated, plated, undistracted, well, chances are you're going to be a little bit closer to your fullness levels of where we want you to stop because it's really hard to very consciously sit there without distraction and stuff yourself sick. So I think that fullness is kind of the final piece. It's something we have to work on for quite some time for a lot of folks, but it makes it so much easier, even though people want it first, to do it last.
Yeah, the issue with fullness is it's just so nuanced. Unlike snacking, which is pretty clear, and even hunger, once you get pretty good at identifying it, there's no confusion. It's like feeling an urge to go to the bathroom. I never have to sit and wonder, do I need to go? Do I not need to go? The answer is if you have to ask, you don't. You're not hungry, basically. But, one thing I think worth mentioning is when you are, how do I say it? I guess eating when you're hungry is not actually what causes weight gain. People gain weight when their body says it's had enough and then they eat anyway. And so in order to achieve your natural weight, you not only need to eat when you're physically hungry, It also means no longer picking at your kids' plates or walking straight to the pantry after a stressful workday or swiping a handful of nuts when you walk past your coworker's desk, right? The goal is to respect that boundary and stop when your body is no longer communicating, it needs more energy. And the reality is most of us have no idea what stopping at enough means. And I just want to be clear here and give you all some data points, maybe to help you identify what that actually looks like. And I think it's a neutral feeling in your stomach, meaning there's no heavy or stretch sensation. You can maybe do 10 jumping jacks or go for a brisk walk, no problem after you've eaten, right? As you said, Steph, earlier, your stomach is the size of a fist when, I mean, of course, I don't know, I kind of visualize it as a deflated balloon that kind of expands, because when you haven't eaten for several hours or you've been hungry for a really long time, I don't know about you, but I've noticed that I cannot consume as much food as I could when I've only been hungry for, like, let's say 30, 45 minutes. And so we have to still honor and respect that boundary, but there is, again, nuance, and that's what makes it a little fuzzy for people. And it takes time to really unpack and learn. As you said, I think the 9-inch plate is a great place for most women to start out the gate. But it is important to remember that your mind has no limits when it comes to food, right? We get that dopamine hit. I mean, our brain is a greedy bastard. Of course, it's going to want more and more and more. So we can't really trust the mind in this process, right? We don't want to be taking life advice from a toddler, and we definitely can't trust our emotionally kind of impulsive, instant gratification chasing brain when it comes to food and how much we're eating. So this means we have to get out of our head and into our body. And the reality is the stomach has limits. And when somebody learns to respect those limits, then they will never diet again. So, Steph, any further thoughts that you want to contribute here as we wrap up the 7 lean habits for permanent weight loss? I mean, this is ultimately what we help our clients master in the Unstuffed program, so they never do have to diet again, so they can lose weight and maintain it through habits, meaning over time it becomes subconscious, it becomes easy, it becomes effortless, it becomes a part of your identity. It's not something that you're doing anymore, it's someone that you've become.
I think the one thing that I will add is if there is another habit floating around somewhere to make it an even 8, it is patience. That's the habit that you'll be mastering throughout the entire journey. If you want to be someone who has a sustainable transformation, then you have to learn how to be patient while you figure this out, because what looks like perfect on day 1 is going to look very different on day 41 and 101. You change, you grow, and you become much more capable of communicating with your body. And so it's just, as you said, it's so nuanced. Everybody's journey is a little bit different. It depends on how much unlearning you have to do. The habits in and of themselves are easy enough on paper, even though I think you and I have probably done a good enough job of making them confusing here. But when you see them on paper, it's just like, hey, I could just make a list. It's not that big a deal. Eat when you're hungry, stop when you're satisfied, sit your ass in a chair, eat undistracted, eat 3 to 4 times a day, don't snack in between. But there is a lot of emotional work that needs to be done because of all of the reasons, as you mentioned, Leslie, we eat when we're not hungry. Whenever we're eating because we're not hungry, it's because we're chasing a feeling. We are chasing an emotional experience that is different than the one we're currently having. And that is where the real work is. So patience, 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 my lovelies.
Yes, and if you want to learn more about how to overcome instances of emotional eating, then definitely check out next week's episode, because we're going to start kind of slowly unpacking this for you all in a way that is easy to digest and implement. So thanks for tuning in. I hope everyone has a great week, and we'll catch you next Tuesday.